Hello everyone, my name's Kate and I'm from Sea Shepherd, and I've come to talk to you today a little bit about my journey from ocean admirer to environmental activist. So when I was preparing for this conference, I was trying to think a little bit about what were the key steps along my journey that got me to the point that I was jumping on a ship and sailing to Antarctica. And I came up with 4 key components that I'm going to try and squish into the next 11 and a half minutes for you. So the first one being, what was my motivation, or what got me to the point that I joined Sea Shepherd? And when I was thinking about it, it really stretched quite far back to my childhood. That's not actually me, but that's a typical picture on the British coast. And this is where I spent most of my childhood on summer holidays, scrubbing around in the rock pools with my family, learning about all the different animals that lived in the ocean. And that's where I really developed a deep love for our oceans. But it wasn't until 2011, when I was traveling through Colombia, that I decided to do my open water diver's certification. So that's me on my qualifying dive. I learned how to scuba dive, and I really deepened my love for the oceans at that point, and I just wanted to spend as much time as possible underwater, became quite obsessed with diving at that point. Since then, I've had the good fortune of diving in some of the best dive sites around the world, and I plan a lot of my travel and holidays around diving. And when I was looking back through pictures, it was this particular dive trip that I took. I don't know if you guys have been there, but this is Mobile Island off the coast of Borneo. And it was on this trip that I started to join some of the dots together between the oceans that I loved and some of the impacts that humans are having on that ocean environment. So, for example, we would go diving and we would see beautiful creatures like this little orangutan crab and this very smiley parrotfish. And then we'd go back to our beach huts and we would eat beautiful crabs and beautiful fish. And I started to think about the impact of what we're consuming from going from those dives and hanging out with these creatures and coming back and eating them. Similarly, I also took this photograph. This is actually in Sabah, and that hut is where we booked our dive trip from. And clearly you can see the impact of pollution in the ocean. And I actually took this photograph of a lizard, and I said to the dive school, "What do you think happened to that lizard?" And they told me they thought that it might have banged its head on the propellers of a boat. But clearly you can see the plastic bottle on its face. And I started to join a few dots on that trip. Shortly after that, a few things happened in quite quick succession. So I moved to Melbourne, and I went to a screening of a documentary called Cowspiracy. I strongly recommend you watch that film. And it was being hosted at an organization that I'd heard of called Sea Shepherd. I knew that these guys had some ships, but I didn't realize that you could get involved with them without going on the ships. And on that night, I spoke to a lot of onshore volunteers, and they told me, "No, that's fine, you can come down and you can just help us fundraise on the weekends." So a couple of weeks later, I was down at the Steve Irwin, which is docked in Williamstown when it's not on campaign. And that was actually the first ship stall that I did, where we sell the merchandise. And I went around and did a tour like we do for free for the public. And at the end of that tour, I watched a short documentary about this campaign, Operation Icefish, which to this day is still my favorite campaign that Sea Shepherd's ever run. And during that documentary, I saw really the extent to which we're absolutely plundering our oceans. And not only the way that we are destroying the oceans through overfishing, but also the human element through the human trafficking that happens a lot in these giant fishing organizations. And that was really the point that I thought, okay, I really need to do something to protect these oceans that I'd come to love. The next thing I was thinking about was the amount of support that I had, and I do appreciate how lucky I am to have all the support throughout my journey. So after joining Sea Shepherd, I became quite obsessed, and I went to beach cleans every weekend. I was doing market stalls and fundraising. I was going to demonstrations and rallies. We would go along to bands who supported us and sell our merchandise. I was reducing my plastics. I was doing ship stalls every weekend, and I became a tour guide myself, showing people around the ship that I loved. And eventually I started working in the engine room on the Steve Irwin, so I'd spend my weekends and eventually taking time off my paid work to go in and get scrubbed up and crawl around underneath the bilge and get the ship ready to go on campaign. And it was that point that I realized I really needed to join the crew. So the other people that supported me throughout that process with these guys, these are my colleagues, and they were fantastically supportive from day one. So they came down to the ship, they brought their families, they did tours of the ship, they bought all of our merchandise. And when I said to them, after a few years of inane Sea Shepherd chatter, that I really felt like I needed to join the crew, they said, "Yes, that's fine, I think you should, off you go." So I really couldn't have done it without their support, and I understand how lucky I am to have their support. But also it took obviously a fair bit of courage to join the ships. And this is me on the ships of the Steve Irwin. So I joined for a few months before we set sail. And I couldn't believe that I managed to join the crew. And this is the day that we set sail. So this is a saying goodbye to all of our friends in December a few years ago. And down here actually are the colleagues that I was just talking about who came to wave me off to see me on campaign. So really lucky to have their support. And also courage was another big step that you need to have. Courage to make a big change in your life. So courage to ask my boss to actually leave my job, courage to pack up my life, to put stuff into storage, to give up my house. And around that time I started Googling as well some of the previous campaigns and really working out what had happened in Antarctica. And so this little clip that I'm going to show you really highlights the courage of a lot of our crew members. So this is a campaign, Zero Tolerance, that happened a few campaigns before I went to Antarctica. And during this campaign, the Sea Shepherd ships had found the whaling fleet, and the whaling fleet were trying to refuel from one vessel to the other. And so the captains decided that they would put the Sea Shepherd vessels in between the two whaling vessels to prevent them from being able to refuel and catching whales. So I'm going to play this short clip. It's narrated by the founder of Sea Shepherd, Captain Paul Watson.
In all of these campaigns, the crew are under the understanding that there are inherent dangers, that we're not just saying we're coming down here to risk our lives to protect the whales, we actually are risking our lives to protect the whales. And when putting our ships in a position to block their operations, we mean that we're there to block their operations. Now, there's no point in saying you're going to stand fast if you move out of the way at the last moment. If you're going to say you're going to stand fast, then you stand fast.
Yeah, so really quite distressing images. You can see how intense these battles on the seas get, and just the insanity of the Nishin Maru there, pummeling the Bob Barker with water cannons to try and deter us, and even throwing explosives, which, when you consider that's a refueling vessel, was just absolutely bizarre. So these are the kind of things that our crews do regularly, and these guys are my heroes, which I followed them before I went on my campaign, which was Operation Nemesis. Now, we didn't have any confrontations quite as intense as that, but we had some fairly scary moments. So we had some pretty big storms. And I actually learned to drive the small boats in Antarctica, so that was probably one of the scariest things I've ever done. That's me in the little small boat there. So again, something I never thought that I would get to do. And obviously dealing with images like this. So this is a footage that came from our helicopter when we found the Nishin Maru with a dead whale on the deck there. So quite a lot of courage involved in going on these campaigns. And I went straight from Antarctica to Mexico to Operation Milagro, where there's a fish that's being caught by poachers because it's worth a lot of money on the black market, and they're placing these illegal gill nets in the water. So our job as Sea Shepherd is to try and locate the gill nets and pull them out of the water. And obviously the poachers are not very happy about the fact that we're there. And so they actually sent us death threats while we were in Mexico a couple of years ago. This is one of their fishing vessels. They wrote Sea Shepherd on the side of it and set fire to it and said that they were going to come and set fire to our vessels. So that was pretty scary. We had the two Sea Shepherd vessels on the left there and the Navy protecting us on the right. So the Navy had protected us throughout this campaign. Luckily, that threat never came to fruition, but that was a pretty intense moment on that campaign. And then earlier this year, I went back for Milagro 4, and the situation in Mexico is getting more and more tense. The poachers are less and less afraid of our vessels, and we used drones to locate the nets at nighttime. And while we were there, they actually started shooting our drones out of the sky. And then also, just after I left the campaign, they shot at one of our vessels. So pretty intense times on that campaign. And now we have the Navy living on board the vessels to protect our crews. And as Captain Paul Watson said, you know, all Sea Shepherd crew go on these campaigns. They are willing to risk their lives to protect their oceans. So we do have the Navy protecting us, but it's pretty intense on campaign. But the last thing I wanted to talk about was do your research, because unless I had happened to turn up at that film showing in Melbourne on that night, I wouldn't have known that you could get involved in so many different ways. So I've done you a little Sea Shepherd hack. If you do want to get involved with Sea Shepherd, you don't have to jump on a ship and go to Antarctica. You know, we have volunteers onshore all around Australia that you can get involved with and help out in your spare time. Even if you just follow us on social media and share some of our posts and get our messages out there, we really appreciate that. You can support us by giving monthly through the Direct Action Crew. Online, you can sign up and give monthly donations. Even if you just buy our merchandise, all of that money goes directly to keeping our ships at sea. Or we do beach cleanups pretty much every month, once a month, around Australia, and you can come along to one of those beach cleanups. So these are all the ways that I could have supported Sea Shepherd that I just didn't know about. So I guess the take-home message from this, I found this quote earlier that I think Clive was talking about this morning. A hero is someone who has given his or her life to something bigger than oneself. So just doing something beyond what you would normally do for a cause that is bigger than for yourself. So really have a think about what your motivation is. It doesn't have to be ocean conservation, but whatever it is that drives you and that you're passionate about. Draw on all the supports that you can. I was very fortunate to have supportive friends and family. But yeah, lean on your friends and family for as much support as you can, and try and dig deep down and find that courage to push you over the line, whether it's moving to another country, quitting your job, whatever you need to do. But make sure you do your research, because there may be lots of other ways that you can get involved that you didn't realize unless you do a good bit of research and listen to talks like these and get inspired by everyone around you. And I truly believe that if you do all of those things, you can go forth and make massive changes in the world. So I really like that meme. So thank you very much for listening.
The Hero Roundtables are the global events that ask the question, what is a hero? You've just seen one hero talk. To find more and join the conversation, visit our website or social media.